After a weekend that brought heavy rains and flash flooding to the southwest, heavy mountain snows to Montana through the Canadian provinces, the weather is calming down as we begin a new work week. But what's on the horizon? Will this summer pattern ever break, and will we really see fall across the lower 48? Let's dive right into our details. As we begin on our Tuesday, we are watching that area of low pressure that brought heavy rain to the east coast throughout last weekend. It's beginning to move off and away from the United States. We still have some unsettled weather here across the Four Corners region, but as another low in a trough makes its way onto the California coast, we are seeing heavy rains spread into California and mountain snows for the Sierra Nevadas. This is going to move up through the Rockies as we go through the remainder of this week, and it's going to become not quite the storm that we thought it would last week, but it's still going to bring a lot of precipitation to the northern plains by the middle of this week. And as we begin on our Wednesday, we're going to watch that low now move out of California towards eastern Utah into western Colorado. It's going to bring rainfall to western Utah and Nevada and snow in those higher elevations. But out across the eastern two-thirds of the United States, we are dry thanks to this high pressure that is centered over Ontario. That high pressure is going to direct the weather for most of the week for the eastern half of the United States. Even though we have a low pressure here and it's going to move off to the northeast, we're not going to see that eastward progression of precipitation until we get to another trough that is beginning to form across parts of British Columbia before it dives down into the lower 48 as we get to our Thursday and our Friday. So let's look at our upper level pattern. As I mentioned, we have that area of low pressure over California associated with a deep trough here out in the west. Out ahead of it, we have a ridge building across the central plains of the Ohio Valley. That's going to continue the warm weather east of the Mississippi, but as that trough continues to move off toward the northeast with that area of low pressure, we're now watching another system by the time we get to Friday, and that's going to eventually interact with this main low, and it's going to bring a threat of precipitation to the Great Lakes and the Ohio Valley as we get Saturday into Saturday evening, and that's going to bring in a shot of cooler air for the eastern half of the United States as we end our weekend, as the west begins to warm up as a ridge starts to build across the western half of the United States. And it is this area and this trough that's going to bring much cooler weather to the east coast as we get toward the beginnings of next week. So let's put it all into motion here. As we begin on our Tuesday, we have scattered showers across the northern plains. Those are going to quickly move through Minnesota. We do have the heavy snow here in California associated with that low pressure. We do have calm conditions across the eastern half of the United States, again, thanks to the high pressure. But we're going to watch that low start to move towards Colorado and Nebraska by the time we get towards our Wednesday into our Thursday morning. That's going to spread precipitation northward into the Dakotas. Behind it, we're going to have snow in those higher elevations. In terms of severe weather, we're really not expecting much for our Tuesday. We do have a slight chance of some heavy rainfall would be the main threat here across parts of South and South Central California, just to the north of the Los Angeles area. Even going into our Wednesday, we're going to continue to watch for a threat of severe weather, but it's a marginal risk at that, and it's mainly due to that high amounts of precipitation that we are expecting. Same thing through central New Mexico. As we get some moisture coming up from the Pacific, we could have heavy rainfall across central New Mexico for our Wednesday. In terms of our temperatures, though, we are really still seeing those warm temperatures in the southern tier down into the 80s and 90s. 80s as far north as St. Louis and Springfield, Illinois. Back across the northern tier, though, we're in the 40s, and we still see the remnants of that snowpack here across parts of Saskatchewan into Manitoba, where highs are going to be kept down into the 30s. We start to see a little bit of cooler air spilling into the northeast. That is going to keep temperatures there down in the 50s and 60s, but we still have 80s across the southern states out through the desert. The Mountain West, you're cool for this time of the year, 60s and 70s. But the 80s are making their way up towards Lincoln, Nebraska. And we see a repeat of that as we make our way to our Thursday, with that warmth now stretching up into South Dakota. Even some places in southern and southwestern Minnesota, you could be in the 80s for your Thursday afternoon temperatures. In the Northeast, we are cool for this time of the year, 50s and 60s. And we start to see that next jab of cooler air and associated wintry precipitation for those higher elevations of western Wyoming and north central Utah, where temperatures will be in the 30s and 40s for your afternoon highs. But as we go past Thursday, as that area of low pressure continues to make its way through the northern plains, bringing rain to North and South Dakota, we start to watch this next trough begin to dig. And as it does, it's going to interact with that warmer air out ahead of it, and it's going to produce showers here for the Ohio Valley Saturday afternoon into Sunday. Now, this particular model has trended a little further south, but by Sunday afternoon, we could see a line of storms making its way towards the East Coast. So we're going to have to watch this, because there is a clash in temperature air masses with this particular system as we get that colder air making its way into the Ohio Valley, and out ahead of it we have 70s and 80s for the East Coast. So severe weather is definitely something we will be monitoring here at the weather farm. But as we look towards the West Coast, it is quiet. Here comes that next system making its way into the Pacific Northwest for our Sunday, bringing the next trough to that area, mountain snows, and that one has some potential to really flip the weather pattern as we get towards the last full weekend of October. So this is something we'll also be watching in the days ahead. In terms of our precipitation, we're going to see the heaviest amounts of rain across the Ohio and Tennessee valleys, across the northern plains, and out across California, where we have those troughs making their way onshore, and it's continuing to bring heavy amounts of rain and heavy amounts of snow. Out across British Columbia, we're getting that rainier season where we see trough after trough making its way through British Columbia before entering the Rockies and the West. So that's going to produce locally heavy amounts of rain along the coast, but as you get in those upper elevations, those mountains, we're going to be measuring snow in feet. Out across the East Coast, you're going to have a chance to dry out over the next 5 to 7 days. And in terms of our snowfall, it's going to be confined mainly to those higher elevations across the West, the Sierra Nevadas, the Rockies, across the Canadian provinces, the Canadian Rockies, and British Columbia and Alberta. So again, we're going to watch this, and the snow is going to start to pile up in those mountainous regions. Taking a look region by region for liquid precipitation, we're here in the Ohio and Tennessee Valley, we're going to see the heaviest amounts of rainfall from places like Cape Girardeau through Paducah up towards Louisville and Cincinnati. You could see 2 to 3 inches of rain by the time we get to our Sunday morning. A little bit lesser amounts to the north. Across the Great Lakes, isolated amounts 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Now, one thing I do want to point out with this particular model that we've seen is the GFS, and this is the model we're showing, has shifted that axis of heavier rain further south. The European model at the time of this recording was still showing a heavy axis here along the I-70 corridor from St. Louis to Indianapolis to Columbus with the rainfall amounts 1 to 2 inches. We're going to watch over the next 24 to 48 hours if the European model stays with its forecast and the GFS kind of retreats back, or if the GFS is the more likely solution at this point. So there is some uncertainty on who will see the heavy amounts of rainfall across this area. But as we approach the weekend, though, we have a lot of important college football games in this area, with Notre Dame hosting USC this coming weekend. The Indiana Hoosiers are hosting Michigan State on Saturday afternoon. So a lot of college football games will be impacted by the rain as it moves through on Saturday afternoon. Looking across the southeast again, through that Tennessee Valley, that's where we're going to see the heavy amounts of rainfall, 1 to 2 inches. As we make our way down into Mississippi and Alabama, lesser amounts, generally 1/2 inch, though an isolated thunderstorm or heavy downpour could produce locally 1 to 2 inches of rain. As we make our way through the northern plains, we're going to see a swath through central Nebraska, but the heaviest amounts are going to be found across parts of central North Dakota into Saskatchewan and Manitoba, where we could see 2 to 4 inches of liquid rain. This is going to fall in the form of rainfall, as the cold air is not going to make its way in with this system like the one we saw over the weekend. So this will fall as rainfall, but it's up as we get closer towards Hudson Bay and on the backside of that low pressure system Thursday into Friday, where we could see a few inches of snow falling across the Canadian provinces, as illustrated here by our snowfall map for Manitoba. So this is going to be to the north and east of Lake Winnipeg. So those areas that saw the heavy snow this past weekend, 20 to 30, 40 centimeters of snow, you could be in line for another 20 meters of snow with this next system, something we'll definitely be watching. Out across California and the Southwest, we're going to have locally 1 inch rainfall amounts, especially along the coast. Here across the Sierra Nevadas, a lot of this is going to fall in the form of snowfall in those higher elevations, where we could see 2 to 3 feet of snow with this particular system as it makes its way Tuesday into Wednesday before it finally moves out and we prepare for the next round to move in as we end next weekend. And after we get through that, we're going to start to see this system set up, because we're going to get warm air being pumped back up to the north. This is for our Friday. Out ahead of that system, temperatures are well into the 80s. All the way up through Iowa, even southwestern Wisconsin. Behind it, we're seeing temperatures in the 50s and 60s. That cooler air starts to move south and east, and we're going to see temperatures here across the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes held down in the 70s, 40s, and 50s behind the front. And as that front pushes through and that precipitation makes its way towards the East Coast, we're pulling down some cooler air. Temperatures across parts of northern Minnesota for our Sunday could be held down into the 40s, but on the backside, we're already seeing that warm air start to pump north. Central Montana, you could be in the 70s and 80s, 80s and 90s as far north as the Oklahoma Panhandle, 90s across the desert southwest. So we're going to see that cooler air make its way towards the east as we get towards Sunday. Out ahead of it, we're seeing temperatures surge into the 70s and 80s. And that's why I say that we could have severe weather setting up across the eastern half of the United States, making its way to the eastern seaboard Sunday afternoon into Sunday night. Something we're definitely going to be keeping an eye on, and we will bring you the latest if there's any threat of severe weather. By the time we get to Monday, that front has completely made its way offshore. Temperatures are cool for this time of the year, but we're already seeing that warming trend building while we wait for the next round of cooler weather across parts of British Columbia to make its way to the lower 48. But our latest 8 to 14 day outlook from the Climate Prediction Center has most of the country east of the Rockies with a high likelihood of above normal temperatures during that time period. It's the western part of the United States that's expected to be below normal temperatures as we approach the last few days of October. In terms of precipitation, we're going to see above normal precipitation from Texas all the way up through the northern plains, back to the Pacific Northwest is we're going to see the start of those atmospheric rivers really start to pummel places like Quileute, Seattle, even down toward Portland. We're going to see above normal precipitation as we close out the month of October. Across the desert Southwest, where you saw 2 to 3 inches of rain over the weekend, you're going to be below normal in precipitation as we close out the month. I do want to jump down to the tropics. We are monitoring one system at the time of this recording on Monday evening, and that is Tropical Storm Lorenzo. Lorenzo is located about 800 miles east of the Leeward Islands. It is moving towards the west at about 15 knots. It has max sustained winds of about 50 knots at the time of this recording. Now, the thing with Lorenzo is it's going to continue its path, but it's going to start to make its turn to the north during the day on our Tuesday, and by Wednesday we expect it to be going north and then heading back towards the northeast and eventually away from all land. And the reason we believe this is going to happen is we're going to watch Lorenzo here on the 500 millibar map. So it's generally in this area, it's making its way, but we have this trough that's digging in, and this other system that's kind of exiting. That's the system that brought the heavy rain to the east coast. It's going to kind of tug at Lorenzo and pull it north, but it is this trough that's definitely going to push it back out away from the United States. So this is why we also monitor out across the tropical Atlantic, the upper level patterns, to see where these storms will go, because right now it's in a low wind shear environment, but it's going to get sucked up by this larger system to its north, and then that trough is also going to come in right behind it to prevent any further westward movement. And so that's why the National Hurricane Center believes it's going to eventually start to turn back to the north and away from any landmass. It's mainly going to be impacting shipping routes and boats that may be out in that part or the ocean. Well, we thank you for joining us here on our Tuesday here at the Weather Farm. Go ahead and drop down a comment of where you're watching this from. What would you like to see in a future forecast? We hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see you soon.